Hello, everyone. We are going to give it one more minute, allow some more folks to join, and then we will kick off our presentation and webinar that we have here. So while we have everyone here, our topic for today is that does Salesforce security have you covered? We are joined with Rachel Beard, who is a distinguished security architect at Salesforce. Welcome. I am Verola Mihailovic, Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Flosum. So we have a very interesting topic for everyone, and then we will have a free offering at the end to get everyone really excited and get them started. A little bit about the topics that we have to talk about here today. As we go on, we will send out the recording at the end, or by the end of today. We'll give you a link to some more information that will help you out in the future. And then as we go on, if you have any questions, feel free to put it into the chat or the Q&A section, and we will do our best to answer it towards the end. And once we are done with the presentation, Rachel will start us off. We will have a Q&A back and forth and have a lively conversation. So welcome, everyone. Rachel, you want to say hi to everyone and get started?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the call today. It's great to be here. I'm Rachel Beard. I'm a distinguished security technical architect at Salesforce that never fits on any kind of a business card. And most of my family does not understand what that means either. What do I do? But I'll tell you what I do. I spend most of my days basically having security conversations with their customers, helping them understand the different layers of security that Salesforce is providing at the network and infrastructure levels. And then I also work a lot with companies to help them build out their security and governance strategies and roadmap, especially if they're making changes, which a lot of my customers are. So we're going to talk about some of the changes in the landscape today. We're going to talk about some of the security solutions that you should be aware of. And as V mentioned earlier, there's going to be a freebie at the end too. So that's exciting. And we'll make sure we do leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. All right. So IT governance is really top of mind for all the companies that I work with right now. And over the last couple of years, it's been quite chaotic, really. We've had a lot of upheaval in the workforce, starting with the Great Resignation, which went on for several months, millions of people changing their jobs. And then leaning into this year, where we're seeing a landscape of layoffs across multiple different industries right now. This is really top of mind from a security perspective because when people move, data tends to move with them. So it's really important to invest some extra time and effort right now into your threat strategy around understanding insider usage of data and when is there a chance of data leakage, whether it's a bad actor trying to take data with them when they go, maybe they're going to take data to a competitor. Or even accidental data loss or accidental misuse of data, which also happens when you have a lot of movement and you have new hires and people that maybe don't quite understand the sensitivity of the data and policies around it. On top of all of that, we've also seen a lot of changes in the regulatory landscape. I get questions all the time right now about whether there's certain data residency requirements for various locations, or whether there's a requirement around data subject access rights and giving individuals access to what data you've collected about them or deleting the data. We're seeing changes internationally, but even within the United States, there's a lot of change, and we're seeing individual states coming on board with their own privacy policies, which means that there's a constant need to react to that. And then rapidly evolving technologies. We keep seeing adoption of new apps, new platforms, even with the exciting new technologies like ChatGPT. How do we integrate this into our business? And how do we make sure that as we introduce new technologies and capabilities, that we're doing this in a way that's really safe and compliant? So for all of these reasons and many more, IT governance has become really top of mind for the companies that I work with, and is a top priority in general for CIOs this year. When it comes to today's webinar topic and does Salesforce security have you covered? This is where I spend the majority of my time as a security architect. So the short answer is Salesforce security has you covered on some levels, and there's a shared responsibility on the customer side for protecting the way that your users interact with data and preventing unwanted users from accessing the system by using strong authentication. So on the left side, where you see we've labeled Salesforce responsibility, this is everything that Salesforce does to keep the data safe when it's with us in our data centers. Everything that we have from a physical security point of view, to the monitoring of individuals within our data centers, to the way that we permission those users, how the data gets stored, how it's locked up, even everything that goes into place from a backup and recovery perspective for our disaster preparedness and data recovery strategies. So there's a ton in effect there, and all of it gets tested all the time. We have our continuous threat detection, we have our own internal testing and auditing, and we have third parties that are testing and auditing, and even our customers are testing and auditing. So we have to deliver a high standard of security and reliability at all times. On the customer side, though, when you're configuring your Salesforce environment, it's really important that you're thinking about, what do I need to put in place to make sure that only the users I intend to log in are able to? So we all know about MFA, and hopefully most of you are also using single sign-on. Using combinations of strategies like that is going to be really effective for making sure that you have just those authorized users logging in. But then it's also really important to continue to evaluate who logs in and what can they see and do once they get logged in. So this concept of least privilege access is really, really important to implement from the beginning, but it's also really important to continue to evaluate so that you don't have a big sprawl in terms of user privileges and therefore increase the surface of risk. So I spent a lot of time coaching companies on this, whether it's understanding the sharing model and making sure that it's not too public, all the way down to how do you understand what's actually being used in your org, and how can you put in some real-time prevention for data loss. So being proactive is extremely important, and the benefits of being very proactive is that you can get more insights around user behaviors. What parts of the application are they using, what's not being used, and understanding some of that very specific level of detail, like did somebody go look at this record that could have sensitive data? This is really interesting because a lot of the companies that I work with could have information on minors or political figures or celebrities. So it's really important to understand who goes and searches for that information and who views it, whether or not it even contains PHI or PII. So if you do have PII, though, any kind of personal information or regulated information, it's going to be even more important to be able to understand who's interacting with that data. It's extremely important that you're working to prevent data loss, because you don't want competitive data to exit the system and be in the hands of another business. And it's also important from a compliance perspective as well, should you have sensitive information in there, any kind of personal information. And then for productivity and adoption, being able to understand how your users interact with the system is critical, and that way you can reduce any bottlenecks and make sure that you also clean up anything that's not in use. So get rid of technical debt, and it's really important to understand usage to do that. And then just really getting in prevention with real-time understanding of how of any kind of risky behaviors or any kind of anomalies that could be going on in your org. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So one of the tools that you might have heard of from Salesforce specifically is Salesforce Shield, but it's kind of interesting. When I mention Salesforce Shield, most of the time, the reaction that I get is, oh, encryption. We need to encrypt our data. We need to think about how do we manage our keys for encryption at rest. And yes, platform encryption is part of Salesforce Shield, but I'm actually bringing up Shield because I want to talk more about the monitoring and prevention piece, which is also a part of Shield. And this event monitoring piece is extremely valuable because it allows you to really understand all the user behaviors in your org, as well as put in that real-time prevention and start to get machine learning based threat detection to understand anomalous patterns. Also part of Shield, though, are data detect, which allow you to find sensitive information in your org and apply data classification to that sensitive data. And then field audit trail for allowing you to understand changes to data over time. We used to say 10 years of data, but now we're saying it's 60 fields per object, and you can track the changes to data indefinitely. So it's up to you how long you want to hang on to it. So briefly, just along this implementing security and understanding insider risk, I want to talk about event monitoring, and I'll leave some time for Q&A at the end if you want to talk about use cases. But with event monitoring, what we're thinking about here is understanding all that user activity, putting in place that prevention, and then getting more granular about adoption and performance. And the way that this works is through logging. And if you imagine every single user activity gets logged, but it's not just that a user performed this action, it comes with a whole bunch of contextual information. So if you're looking at somebody who's running reports, it'll help you understand who ran a report, what location were they at when they ran this report, what was the time of day, what fields were on the report, what records were on that report, and even how long did it take that report to run. So you're going to get security information around what did a user look at and did they download it, but you're going to get adoption information about what reports are being run and which ones aren't. And you're also going to get very strong performance metrics for understanding how everything's running in your org. So event monitoring pulls all of this together because we bring in these two distinct types of logging logging options. One of them is our event log files, which has been around a long time. There's over 50 of these types of events. They're delivered in daily batches. These are the ones that typically get sent to a SIM. So if you have a security monitoring tool, you can send those logs there in order to aggregate them with other security events. Real-time event monitoring is streaming off of platform events. And these events are stored in big objects. They're accessible for up to 6 months, and they can give you that immediate insight. Maybe someone's just left or they've given their resignation notice. You want to understand everything they've done leading up to that moment. If they've walked away with information, you'll get that with real-time event monitoring. Threat detection also is a piece of event monitoring, which is part of Shield. It allows you to understand how a user's behavior kind of ranks compared to their typical behavior. So maybe you've got a user who's interacting with reports in a different way. They're working with different objects. They're downloading information using an API tool. Threat detection can help you identify when that behavior is anomalous. And transaction security is a little bit different. This is your own security policies that you can put in place, very granular conditions that can alert you in real time or block specific activities. So maybe it's okay for a user to run reports, but we don't want them to download a lot of records, or maybe we don't want them putting classified information onto a report, something that's confidential or sensitive. And transaction security can help you do that. And Analytics Studio is our tool that will allow you to very quickly digest that data and understand the baselines in your org, and then figure out when you have a change in the pattern that would help you understand that maybe an individual is also acting out of character. Maybe they're viewing a lot of records. Maybe they're looking at all these different dashboards, and you want to surface that. So all those work together in order to help put together a comprehensive monitoring and understanding of user behavior, as well as that real-time prevention through transaction security, which allows you to be very proactive and identify that risky behavior in real time. We do have a Trailhead module for this. For those of you who like Trailhead, I do. I actually wrote this trail. I'm a big Trailhead fan. I'm a 4-star ranger, so I was really excited to give back in this way. But you can get a sample demo org, and you can start using event monitoring there to understand what you can learn from the tool. And I'll give you a couple of exercises in that trail to help you understand how you can prevent these types of threats. So overall, when we're thinking about how we're going to respond to these different data privacy needs and data governance and data residency and all these different uh, obligations that are coming up, it's really important that we think about everything in our infrastructure. So as you're thinking about data residency, if you have data that's coming from different regions, making sure that you have a strategy around that and that you have control over what data is being processed and what types of compensating controls you're putting in place around that data, making sure that you have strategies in place for resilience, from a security perspective, understanding Salesforce's security model, but also making sure that you are putting in place your access controls, authentication, and any advanced security that you might need in order to prevent data loss or misuse of data. And then data privacy is really important, understanding how you can deliver on data subject access requests and making sure that you have ways that you can delete data as needed or provide a copy of the data, and then making sure that you have an agility layer as well. So with all of that, I want to think about how do you get that baseline level of understanding of where you're at in order to start making all those changes and achieve those specific governance goals. So I'm going to turn it over to V. He's going to talk just a little bit about OrgScan, which is a great tool for allowing you to dig in a little bit and figure out where are you at today from an IT governance perspective, and where do you maybe need to put some attention to strengthen the security of your org.
Thank you, Rachel. So as we know, talking about security and getting started can feel a little bit overwhelming. We recently, as part of our series, had a conversation with a CISO and developed the CISO's guide to Salesforce security. And one of the key things that came out of that conversation is knowing where to start and creating a baseline of where you are. So here at Flosum is we have a free organizational scanner, and then we'll just put into our chat some links here where you can either choose to do it yourself or you can book a meeting with a Flosum expert to go over your report card. We have the ability to take a quick look around your organization and see where you are in terms of your functional security and understanding your profiles and permissions, understanding your data security, as Rachel was mentioning, so talking about the encryption and the visibility and the key things related to PII. Some things involving external access, so data sharing, who has what, where, and why, and then third-party applications. And then the key things for us in terms of where Flosum comes from is we have the ability to do software composition analysis, taking a look at some of the DevOps packages and libraries, and then looking at the organizational security posture from logins, MFA, and all these things that Rachel was talking about. If we go to the next slide real quick. So we work together with Salesforce. We have a Flosum platform where we take that step towards DevSecOps, taking all of the good stuff that Rachel was talking in terms of the security posture and incorporating that as part of the DevOps lifecycle. Our platform not only allows the application lifecycle management, but also we have the capabilities of making sure we're backing up your data and making sure that your data governance is in place, as well as a DevSecOps layer on top of your DevOps. So this is all really good stuff. So if you're interested, please reach out to us, take a look at the organizational scanner. We're more than welcome to your feedback. Feel free to reach out to myself or Rachel, and we will make sure that you set you up with the right resources to ensure that we both understand what your security posture is and what are some next steps to take. We'll go to the next slide. What we have is we have a few questions. We're going to be doing a little bit of a Q&A with Rachel. And what we wanted to do is we have some questions that are lined up that have come in. And I'd love to ask these questions for Rachel to get your perspective on this. So a really good question came in talking about understanding the need or what is, everyone's on their journey in Salesforce and using the application Salesforce offers. What is a good indicator that a company needs to think more about security?
Yeah, there's quite a few different things that I'm listening for in my conversations. One of them is change in general. So maybe you're adding a new application or new use cases, and you're going to be processing different kinds of data. So that's a great time to renew that view of least privilege and zero trust. And what are you doing to make sure that everyone has the right permissions and privileges? Another thing is simply the presence of any kind of sensitive data, whether it's PII or something that's particularly regulated, like HIPAA, PHI type of data. And then if you have any competitive data as well, it's really important that you understand access to that. I think a lot of times I see models that are optimistically very open for transparency and sharing, but that can cause a lot of problems from data loss perspective. So whenever I hear that these types of data are present, I really like to dig in a little bit more and understand who really actually needs to access this data and try to narrow it down in scope.
Oh, that's perfect. And along the same veins, a lot of the conversations that arose when talking to CISOs or folks in upper management thinking about security is what is the responsibility of Salesforce versus the folks that are using Salesforce? Often enough, it's covered underneath this big blanket that it's Salesforce, we're covered.
Yes. And I always like to shout from the rooftops that Salesforce is a trusted cloud provider, and everything that we have built into our trusted security posture. And I can go on for a long time about everything that's built into that infrastructure. If you want that long conversation, just let me know. And actually, this is an exciting time because with some of our announcements around Hyperforce, there are some changes to how we deliver our infrastructure. But I really like to think about that line being, once you give out credentials to people, what are they doing with them? And before SSO was really popularized, and I didn't have a lot of customers using single sign-on, I've been at this for a long time. I would find that there was a lot of theft of credentials. There was a lot of incidents of people selling credentials. So being able to implement some of these stronger authentication measures is absolutely critical to making sure that you only have those authorized users in your environment, and then really continuing to stay on top of that monitoring and prevention is really important.
Now, this is getting a little bit into what everyone might be experiencing here is what do you think is the role of security culture, having a good security culture uh, towards creating an initiative around implementing governance, especially within Salesforce?
Yeah, this is really important, but we know that it's absolutely essential that everybody treats the policies with respect and with care. We know that something like 90% of data breaches are attributed to the human element in some way. And again, it's not always because of a bad actor. It can be accidental. But so making sure that that security is strong across the board. So the way that your users access Salesforce, what they're allowed to do in terms of downloading data, are they allowed to use their own devices, all the way out to things outside of Salesforce that are really important, like having proper care around phishing attacks, badge surfing, and things like that. It's really important that everyone takes ownership and responsibility as part of the company culture. And I mean, we've talked a lot about the cost of a data breach, right? And it's easy to quantify in numbers what a fine would cost if you were hit with some kind of compliance issue. But for me and the companies that I work with, I really worry about reputational damage, right? So once your name is in the mud for having a breach, and especially if it's an employee related breach that could have been prevented, it's really hard to rebound from that. So I think that that keeps a lot of CIOs up at night thinking about that opportunity for attack, as well as their own personal liability if they didn't do everything that they could have done to prevent that.
Mm-hmm. And then now just talking about, you said, the keeping CISOs and CIOs or folks that are implementing these security initiatives within organizations and starting them up. What do you think is often something that I'm gonna come out straight to this. What is the mistake that folks find themselves going too far, too deep into when starting this off, or thinking about creating a security initiative specifically around an enterprise CRM or an enterprise app where there's a lot of development, a lot of folks in there already?
Yeah, there's a couple of key things. One of them is that everyone's moving really fast. And I get it. There's a lot going on, just like I talked about at the intro of this topic. There's a lot of change. There's a lot to respond to, but it's really important that you slow down sometimes and understand that you can't just react without understanding the impacts of the changes that you're making, and making sure that you aren't inadvertently exposing data when you bring in new functionality. So that applies to everything. It's your sandboxes as well as your production orgs, it's communities and how your communities are being used. All of that is really important to reassess and to do that frequently. It oftentimes, because it's not as exciting as new functionality, it gets pushed to the wayside. You need to make sure that you're reviewing it. And then the other side of that is also communication. It's really important, especially when you have different business units working in an org, or even when you need data privacy teams to be working with the Salesforce team, to be working with the actual sales users and other types of users. Strong communication about the policies is also really, really important.
And this brings about the conversation you were talking about. The implementing this requires more than applications, and it needs to be really systemic within an organization. Um, a lot of folks are talking about DevOps, and then we have this new word coming in, DevSecOps. What
Yes.
does that play in terms of conversations, and where does it become more of a reality as opposed to another buzzword?
Yeah. So DevSecOps, shifting left. I love all the new buzzwords that we get on a new basis every year. But you know what? The core concept is really the same. It's important to make sure that you are thinking about security at every single stage. As you're doing your design, you want to make sure that you're building apps that are secure and compliant. You want to make sure that you have adequate testing processes, so that you don't overexpose data, and you want to make sure that data in your sandboxes is adequately protected, especially if you have third-party contractors coming in that shouldn't be seeing production data. You want to make sure that you have good scale testing and performance testing so that you don't release buggy and poor performing apps into your environment. And then it's really important as you go to production that you have some kind of continuous monitoring as well, so that you understand what's actually happening in those environments and have that really strong prevention in place. So I don't know that the message is different, even though the buzzwords have certainly changed. It's just getting more and more important as more data and more policies and more technology is all in place at once, that you have that strongly built into everything that you're doing.
Cool. And then now we have some product specific questions, and I'll group them
Okay.
around. We're going to have some a little bit deeper technical questions, and this is going to be around, specifically around event monitoring. Somebody would like to know that, does Shield include event monitoring out of the box, or is it a separate module?
So Shield can be licensed as a full bundle with platform encryption, event monitoring, field audit trail, and data detect. Or you can just have event monitoring license separately, instead of getting the full Shield bundle. And for me, what I think it really comes down to, is there a strong requirement around encrypting data? Some of the companies I work with, the answer is yes. They need to encrypt data at rest with keys that they manage themselves. Those companies tend to buy the full Shield bundle. But I think event monitoring is absolutely useful to all companies, because again, it's not just about sensitive or regulated data. It's about understanding that movement of data and preventing data loss.
And then we all know how voluminous the data can get. In terms of triggers, is it over events, or can you set real smart alerts around data spikes or unusual activity when records are cut?
So event monitoring actually runs on its own infrastructure, whether it's the event log objects, event log files rather, or the real-time event monitoring runs on platform events. And then the actions that occur from transaction security happen on top of that. And you don't necessarily need to build a trigger. There are conditions out of the box, point and click, really simple declarative methods. And then there is a way to build conditions with Apex if you need to get more advanced with it. And I have examples of both in that trailhead module that I mentioned.
All right, perfect. And then something a little bit interesting here is somebody's asked about mentioning about unauthorized use or downloading data. Do you
Yes.
know if it's possible to determine where the data is downloaded to, meaning a local or a shared drive?
From Salesforce's perspective, no, we're just tracking the IP address and the download activity. I have seen some other really cool tooling in the ecosystem that can follow that file a little bit better. But that is outside of the purview of just event monitoring, which is going to track the data going in and out of Salesforce.
Yeah, and then with the Flosum platform and our trust center capabilities, we have the ability to go a little bit deeper into that, especially around the DevOps processes. So one question here is finding things about deeper user search activity tracking or things within Salesforce, taking a look at going then auditing or chasing after the nefarious actor. I think that's what some of the questions people have, especially from the audit perspective. Okay, i.e., let's find a no good condition. Let's follow through the journey of how you got from point A to point B. Do you have the capability of enabling that for auditors, for example?
So with event monitoring, you get the granular logs that would detail all of that. So the way that I see a lot of this happen is maybe in my analytics, I can see a pattern that somebody is engaging in a way that's unusual. So I'm going to profile that user. Or maybe they've given notice or there's some other reason I need to profile them. So I can start to go back and build a point of view of what that user's been doing. And I'll give you kind of an interesting example without naming names, but I recently ran a workshop for a really interesting media company, and they had a very specific performer who they needed to track everybody who interacted with not just her data, but her entourage's data. So if this person is performing, they need to know their hair, makeup, outfits, lawyers, all those cool things that travel with this individual. And it's important that nobody is just looking at their data as well. Maybe they're going to call their personal assistant. So they can start to track, who searches for that specific name. What did they click on when they searched that name? Then did they click into any other related records? Do they start building things into a list view? Or are they downloading information? So you can really start to build out that profile of who looked at that interesting or sensitive information. Some things are going to be really straightforward, like understanding who's downloading a large amount of records. And some things you may have to really piece together a little bit more strongly to get that bigger picture, like somebody logging in from an unusual address and then clicking on objects and records that they don't normally. But the data is all there.
Cool. And then two more questions, and they're going to be slightly more technical in nature. And this is going to be around HIPAA, and it does not require but encourages company to encrypt PHI. So the assumption here is to protect the data when it is exported. However, Shield does not, from the understanding that the gentleman asking the question does not encrypt the data on export. Considering this, can you explain why encryption specific field is required, or with the functionality that Shield has?
Yeah, so this is actually kind of a multi-layered question here. So I'll do my best to get at everything. So number one, yeah, HIPAA is encryption under HIPAA is considered addressable. So depending on your requirements and what type of data that you're processing, you may need to add that layer of encryption at rest, and you may not, and I can't advise you one way or the other. If you do need to encrypt data at rest with platform encryption, what that does is it takes the clear text data that humans are reading and writing, and it transforms it into undecipherable ciphertext when it's stored at rest in the platform. It's not an access control like field level security. It doesn't protect what insiders can do with the data. It's just affecting the storage at rest. There's other mechanisms for encrypting data in transit. That's on by default. And then you're going to use your access controls when you want to govern what your users can actually see and do on the platform. So they're very different controls with their own specific function. So to your point, when a user is looking at a record that has encrypted data, we decrypt it so that human can read it. If you don't want it to be readable, you use field level security. And then same goes if you're exporting the data, querying via the API, or using an integration. That data becomes decrypted on demand when a user requests it. It's clear text, human readable, and then can go into that other system. So all that to say, you are absolutely correct. If you download a report with data that's been encrypted, that's no longer data at rest. That's outside of, you're now taking it outside of the platform. And that's outside of the range of what platform encryption does.
Got it. And then one last question, and then maybe I'll chip in. Is there any way to measure the performance impact of transactional security policies? As far as I'm aware of, I have not seen this done before, but I was just wondering if you have happened upon this question previously.
I do get this question sometimes, and with transaction security, I definitely advise you to implement it in a sandbox and perform some testing and understand ideally in a full sandbox so that you can get the right kind of data quantities and things like that in there as well. Typically, I don't see a performance decline with transaction security, and you can really do a lot here by making sure that you have policies that have very specific conditions to them. But absolutely, you should test it in your full sandbox. I don't know that there's a way to measure it aside from there's no automated way to measure it, in other words.
All right, perfect. Rachel, this has been an amazing conversation. Encourage anybody that if you have any more questions, please send them in at the end of the presentation. We'll send a email with a recording and some quick links to get you started. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining in and participating in this lively discussion. Rachel, thank you very much.
Of course, so it's great being here today. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everyone have a fantastic rest of the day.